Well, I have with me today Carrie Gress, who is just a great author. And I have her on the podcast today because I am going to discuss with her latest book, which is a follow up to The Marian Option. And she was on The Art of Catholic discussing The Marian Option a while back. But her newest book is called The Anti-Mary Exposed. And here's the cover: Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity. And as I told Carrie before we started the interview, this one's my favorite book by Carrie so far. It really is eye-opening, and I want to encourage all of you guys to go and grab it. But it is my pleasure to have Carrie back on The Art of Catholic. So, Carrie, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
You, first of all, the Marian Option was really, really good. And it was kind of a response in some ways to the Benedict option and just talking about the role of Our Lady. And then you pivoted. Now you've gone to exposing why the world, in my mind, your book explained a lot of what's going on in the culture at large. But what was the impetus for you to write The Anti-Mary?
Right. It's a great question. I think there were so many different pieces to it that were just fascinating to me. I think initially, I wrote a tiny bit about this in the Marian Option, about this idea of an anti-Marian spirit, and how we had just really shifted culturally. The elite women of our culture really look nothing like Our Lady. And that sort of divide just kept getting wider and wider to me. And I kept asking the question, why is that? Why has Our Lady become sort of the saccharine, one-dimensional, very unapproachable kind of person in the culture, yet have all of these elite women pretty much driving the culture and don't resemble her at all? And I know historically that's just total anomaly, because Our Lady has been such an incredible model for womanhood throughout the centuries. And so anyway, I think it was really just that contrast. And I was just fascinated by how much our culture is just swept up into what has happened with the opinions of elite women and how much they're directing the way that we think as women today. So I really wanted to dig into that further. And it's the anti-Mary I'm not talking about as sort of one individual person, like the Antichrist, but more, John, in one of his letters, talks about the spirit of the Antichrist. And that's kind of more how I mean it in terms of being just a spirit that has taken hold of women. And I think it distills down very easily, because we can see, since the 1960s, what has really been on the chopping block for women are our virginity and our motherhood. And yet, who is Our Lady, the Virgin Mother? So you can see it's a very specific, pointed attack at her virtues and the virtues that women need in order to have fruitful lives. And so anyway, it was all of those kinds of things that kept leading me on to write this book. I spent about 2 years researching it. And let me tell you, it was such depressing research, trying to, this bookmark every single article that had to do with, another baby being flushed down the toilet, or, it was awful stuff. And, that was really an editorial decision too in the book. I've got a few references to stories like that, but it would have been really easy to add a ton more, just because it was so prevalent in the culture. So anyway, that was really where it came from, was just to help women figure out why we're so miserable, why it is that the statistics are showing that we're not getting happier. We keep being told that we need more feminism, and yet there's no scale showing that the more feminism, the more sort of exact equality that we have with men is actually making us happy. In fact, it's pretty clear that we're getting less happy. If you look at things like depression rates, suicide rates, STDs, substance abuse, divorce rates, all of those kinds of things are it's really clear women are just not happy. And how do we get back to that point where we have women who are flourishing and healthy instead of, what we've got today?
Let's talk about the kind of women's liberation movement, because there are a lot of people mistakenly believe that it came from either Enlightenment thinking or some kind of ancient philosophy or something along those lines. Where does the idea of the equality between men and women actually come from?
Yeah, no, I love this question because the answer is completely surprising to everybody. It comes from Christ, of course, and the way that he treated women. But the real fullness of it comes from Our Lady, which is the recognition that she had this honored place, and through her dignity, all women have a certain kind of dignity that was recognized by Christ, and it's brought to the fullness through her. But it's amazing because we just really take this for granted that women are equal in dignity to men, but it's such an anomalous idea if you look at other world religions. I mean, it's not really in Hinduism. It's certainly not in Islam. It didn't come from any of these other places. Aristotle, of course, described women as deformed males. So it's not an innate idea at all. Historically, it's truly a Christian idea, and it's truly through Our Lady that it came from. So it's always amazing to me that the very source of where this idea has come from is now really maligned and totally unrecognized. It's just been so twisted over the centuries that women really think that it just came from secularism or something. So yeah, no, it's from her.
I had this, one of the really eye-opening portions of your book was about goddess worship and where that comes from. And just to relate a story to you, years ago, this is probably 20 years ago or so ago, I was coming out of my apartment building and walking across the parking lot, and a girl passed me coming the other way. She was about my age, and there was something about her that just made my skin crawl. I don't know how else to describe it. Mm-hmm. And her eyes, just something about her was wrong. I don't know how else to describe it, Carrie.
Right.
Anyway, I passed by her, and I saw the car she came out of, and I happened to glance into the back window of her car, and there was, I don't remember what the title of it was, but it was some kind of a goddess worship book that was sitting in the back. And I turned around and looked at her. At the same time, she snapped her head around and stared me dead in the eye and just freaked me out, right? Terrified me. And I thought, that's really weird. Like, what in the world is going on with this girl? And what is this weird stuff she's into, right? And I kind of went on and went my way. Well, and I started reading your chapter on goddess worship, and it blew my mind. A lot of people are unaware of it. Some people know about it, but tell us, what's the background and what's going on in this portion of the women's lib movement?
Yeah, no, this was a fascinating piece because I think that, what I really can distill the women's movement down to is this, like, just a deadly cocktail of Marxism and the occult. I mean, that's fundamentally what these two have brought together. And it's fascinating if you look at, our presidential debates going on. You've got someone like Marianne Williamson, who's clearly a very new agey woman, but everybody's talking about socialism. I mean, it's the same. These same things are joined kind of at the hip, and we don't recognize that they're of a piece in terms of the culture. But the occult element, that was really amazing. I think I first started looking into this demon named Lilith. And Lilith, her story is as old as the hills. I mean, it's older than our own scriptures. And I was fascinated by it because Lilith, basically, she can be described as the demon that seduces men and kills babies. So
it's quite the rep.
It is. But look at what radical feminism did. I mean, this is kind of what happened, was just, we want to be able to act just like promiscuous men, by having all these illicit relationships with men. And if we get pregnant, we'll just kill our children. I mean, this is kind of exactly what happened, and what we're living in. And I think that's one of the kernels that, is just so phenomenal. If you look at the history of the universe, the history of the world, the fact that radical feminism has gotten women to accept as normal the fact that we can kill our own children, I think that that's just one of the astounding elements that, certainly women committed abortions prior to this time, but you never had this massive scale. You didn't ever have 3,000 a day where it was something that was lauded as, an empowering thing. So that's one of the things that they've been able to do by embracing all of this goddess worship, as well as Marxism, which we can talk about the Marxism in a minute. But Lilith, again, the more I started digging into who she was, the more fascinating it got. And her story and stories like Jezebel and others, you can really see how they were prescriptives. These were myths that were told over and over again, basically to warn people, like, if you're going to thwart the authority of God, if you're going to thwart the authority of men and destroy the family through this kind of behavior, things are not going to go well for anyone. And so we have all of these amazing myths that came to us throughout history. And then, of course, you have Our Lady who comes along. So we have, sort of this things you shouldn't do, like the Old Testament, the thou shalt nots, don't act like Lilith, don't act like Jezebel. And then in the New Testament, you have Our Lady comes along. It gives us some sort of a positive way, a positive model to follow, do whatever he tells you to do, saying yes to God, being open to his will, all of those kinds of things. So it's an interesting dynamic to see how important these stories really are. But yeah, I mean, I had no idea how influential she was. The word lullaby comes from the Arabic, meaning something like keep Lilith away. I mean, this is a very prevalent kind of demonic, person, for lack of a better word. She's mentioned in Isaiah in a very barren place, and there's just nothing good about Lilith. And yet, she is, her name is all over lesbian literature. There was the music festival, Sarah McLachlan, but she started it. A lot of other musicians, female musicians, were involved in called Lilith Fair, and then there
totally forgot about that. That's oh my goodness.
Yeah, there was a fund set up in Houston after the Hurricane Harvey called the Lilith Fund, so that women could get abortions after the hurricane. So it's not something that, I'm pulling out of nowhere, but in fact, this is someone who's really lauded as a woman to be, that fought the patriarchy and that women should be, feel empowered by as a model.
And when you talk about them as stories and myths, we're not saying they're not real. There's obviously a reality here. There's a demonic reality that's there.
Yeah. I talked to an exorcist about this, Father Ripperger, and he was great. He said, Lilith is actually one of the hardest demons to exorcise. And he said that remarkable, all demons are genderless because they don't have bodies. But he said this is one demon that will, if the demon manifests itself, they usually look male. But this is one demon that will appear both male and female, basically tricking people into thinking that it's a female. So anyway, it got into some really crazy stuff in terms of the research. But I think the fundamental point is, of course, again, these stories were around really to help us understand how it is that we're supposed to live instead of, falling into the exact same basic pitfalls. And this is what happened in the 1960s, is there were all these women that, we're in a new age, it's post-World War II, men are awful because all the wars start because of them. We're going to do something new. And, it's this incredible hubris that they have, that they think they're doing something radically new. And yet they're doing the exact same thing that has, plagued women for millennia. So it's pretty incredible to just see what happens when you forget these kinds of stories. What happens when you forget that, when there's no strong Judeo-Christian culture, that paganism is always going to creep back in. That's just what happens. And so as a result, we've got Lilith and Jezebel, but you also have this incredible goddess movement that basically was sort of thrown together artificially in the 1970s to kind of underline the fact that what the radical feminists were doing was just saying that women were the most important beings, and actually women-to-women relationships were the height of existence. And this was just kind of a way to underscore that by pointing out all of these goddesses. And if women can sort of identify the goddess within them, I mean, this is part of the rhetoric, is identifying that there is a goddess within you, and you have to sort of follow that power once you've identified it. Then you're infallible. And we can see this element in this infallibility of women, and the believe all women attitudes that people have. And, there's so much chatter about how, the world would be so much better place if women were in control.
Right.
All of that kind of nonsense stems from this very rhetoric. So it's pretty scary.
Is this kind of the underlying idea that's there in a lot of Disney movies and girl powery things and all the rest that you see everywhere? And in fact, after reading your book, my eyes were open even more to this just kind of constant barrage that we are under about
Yeah.
girl power. Even watching my kids like American Ninja Warrior,
Right.
and even the kind of trying to level the playing field between the girls and the boys to make them seem even better in the way that it was promoted, really was kind of shocking to me. Is this,
Yeah.
does it kind of
Yeah.
stem out of this or what?
No, it totally stems from that. And I think that's one of the amazing things about sort of figuring out this anti-Marian spirit is once you see it, you can't unsee it because it's sort of everywhere. But at the heart of it really is this desire to tell women that they have to be powerful and not that they have to be fruitful. It's this erasing of this idea of fruitfulness in our lives. So there's no pregnant, Wonder Woman. There's no pregnant, none of these women are fertile. There's very much this idea that they're just incredibly powerful and they can, beat men at any game. And, I think that's one of the most tired pieces of the whole thing was just the competition that was they set up artificially between men. Because basically what they're saying is men are the pinnacle of creation. We just need to copy them in order for us to reach that. And there's this incredible amount of distorted thinking when you start following that, going down that path. And yet that's exactly what we're still doing. Even I was at Barnes Noble yesterday, and you look at, fierce is the new pretty, she persisted. I mean, all of the children's literature directed at girls is this very much this attitude of girl power and being empowered, rather than saying, women have a much different set of characteristics that we can play up and that are beautiful and that are vital for a healthy culture. And I think that we are missing that piece. We've gotten so visually focused on the powerful piece that we're completely forgetting where our real power lies, which is, of course, in our fruitfulness, in our compassion, in our capacity to really take others into our heart and soul, whether it's biologically or as spiritual motherhood, and transform them through our love and the gifts that we can give to them and help them know one another. And this is at the heart of what we're seeing, even with these mass shootings. I mean, look at these individuals. These are men. Most of them hate women. There's all this bitterness. They're totally isolated. If you look at their families, I'm sure there's probably some very distinct patterns there of divorce and separation and isolation. And of course, the social media situation has only exacerbated that.
Right.
So because the fabric of the family has worn away, this is where most of these social ills are really coming from.
Yeah, no, people think this is going to go away with gun laws or whatever else. They're fooling themselves. It's just not going to happen because it's indicative of the underlying illness that's in our culture.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Every one of your chapters in this book, it was like a little bomb that went off. And but one of them was kind of like a nuclear bomb for me. And that was when you tied together, you already referenced this a little bit, but you tied together the Russian Revolution and the anti-Mary movement. Explain to us what the connection is there, because this is huge.
Yeah, no, it was really one of those great pieces. I mean, each chapter too. I mean, imagine writing this. I mean, it was just these different insights came to me, and like, how come people don't know this? But this was one of those great chapters, and I just really felt like the Holy Spirit made things in very, connected dots very clear that I'd never connected. And Marxism can be kind of hard to talk about because sort of people go blank, and there's just can seemingly be so banal. But I really went back to 1917 and Our Lady's predictions at Fatima, where she said, if Russia isn't converted, then she will spread her lies throughout the world. And I think we normally think of the problems in Russia, Soviet Russia, as having been completely economic. They just ended up being completely backwards economically. Their economy was a disaster. Their crops were a disaster. We think of it big picture in terms of that. But what we've missed and what we haven't been paying attention to was this idea that fundamentally what Marxism has tried to do is say that men and women can be made into new people, that they can become these, like the perfect worker. And in order to do that, they have to get rid of the family. They have to take children away from their mothers and have them raised by somebody else. So the woman is free then to work as she wants. Well, in addition to, of course, getting rid of the children that already existed, the Soviets made sure that abortion was the easiest thing for a woman to do. She couldn't own land or any property, but she could get an abortion any day of the week. And we know their numbers were just huge. And I know Vicki Thorne has talked about meeting a woman who confessed 80 abortions in her life. I mean, the numbers are, like I said, just staggering. And it got to the point, actually, where so many women were having abortions that they had to stop allowing them. They needed to, it's kind of like China, where we're seeing today. The birth rates were plummeting, and they had to do something because they weren't reproducing themselves. But again, we see this idea of we can make women into workers. We can make their career and their work that they're doing, whether it's in the field or wherever within the socialist economy, that's going to be where they really shine and thrive and come into the fullness of life. Well, we now know, of course, that was such a huge lie, and there's nothing fulfilling about that when you destroy the family. And yet that's exact same philosophy that has been applied to the women's radical feminist liberation effort. Is they've made it clear that our careers are the most important thing, and actually our children are truly an obstacle. They've convinced us over and over. Our children are an obstacle to our happiness instead of an avenue through which we can become happy. And it's just amazing how successful they have been in terms of promoting this really throughout the culture. But the big difference, of course, being the Russians at least recognized this was an outside force that was sort of pressing this upon them, and they knew this wasn't sort of a natural, this isn't what they wanted. But in the West, we've just embraced it wholeheartedly and defend it wholeheartedly. That, look at how hard people are fighting for abortion, and it's really is abortion that has become the linchpin that unites so many of these different ideological sectors. They may disagree about everything else, but as long as you agree about abortion, then we'll be your ally. So yeah, it's incredibly sad to see how similar this idea of how we can change human nature to make women these perfect workers is really at the heart of it.
So if you have this happening in the, I'll call it the East, but in the Soviet bloc and in that area of the world, people are sitting back these days going, well, how in the world did this happen so quickly in the West? Like, where does it come from? How did this radical feminism just kind of blow up in the last, 20 or 30 years here?
Yeah, 40 or 50, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing to look at how quickly all of it happened. And in fact, I think the women that were behind it, they saw how quickly it happened and thought, this is a sign of divine providence that this just bloomed so quickly, the way that they look at it. The first thing is I think, again, you had the church was weak. The world is just coming off Second World War. The boomers are being born, and everybody's trying to sort of move past history. So you have all of this incredible brokenness from all these families that have been destroyed, men who've been lost, and this very much a kind of laissez-faire, let's eat, drink, and be merry because we might be dead tomorrow attitude that I think came out of the Second World War, certainly in Europe. So it was kind of ripe for this. Look at something like Woodstock. The culture just was really reacting in dramatic ways, certainly with the sexual revolution. But the added feature that made it spread just like wildfire was definitely the advent of television and the visuals that they were able to use. Someone really glamorous like Gloria Steinem, who was, was a really beautiful, attractive woman, and she just made a compelling case. And so I think that was part and parcel of it, was just the recognition that they were able to use the media in a way that just has never been used before. And so that's where it spread like wildfire. But then you also have sort of these propaganda machines like Cosmopolitan magazine, which was set up to be exactly a mirror of Playboy, and right down to the same kind of graphics, same authors. The whole thing was really set up to be that way. And many of your viewers and listeners will have read Sue Ellen Browder's book, Subverted. It was published by Ignatius Press several years ago. And she worked for Cosmopolitan and described writing fiction, basically, that were passed off as non-fictional stories of these Cosmo women. And, it was these stories of women with these exotic lifestyles and, betting a different man in every city and all of this that was really sold to women as a way to help them or help's not the right word, a way to seduce them into believing that this is really what was going to make them happy. And Sue, of course, has said repeatedly that, it was all fabricated. It was all just stories that they made up. And she was allowed to write about anything. A woman could work in a brothel. She could do anything as long as she wasn't a mother or a virgin. So those are her basic parameters.
Wait, Carrie, you're saying that first of all it's false, and then second of all that women should be aware of what they're doing when they buy Cosmo or Vogue or even People magazine, which, to be honest, until I read your book, I kind of brushed People magazine off as, that's just, the Star Treks, you look at the celebrities and all the rest of it. It's fluff, it's garbage, it's a waste of time. But it's far more insidious than that, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, when you look at the big picture, because you've got the magazines are pushing this idea of, abortion on demand, and we're really, you have all of these different editors working together to make sure that
it's collusion.
American women,
wow,
total collusion. But it doesn't stop there. I mean, it goes to the fashion industry. I mean, even a few weeks ago, you've got Anna Wintour, who runs Vogue, saying, why should we cover Melania Trump? When we have someone so wonderful and Michelle Obama. I mean, there's no balance there whatsoever about women and beauty. It's very much a pro-abortion kind of focus, and it's in politics, it's in Hollywood, it's in music. I know someone who tried to get a pro-life book published by one of the big five. And the agent said, no one will take this. I mean, it's an amazing book, but no one will take this because it's pro-life. So there's a gag hold that this group of women that I call the matriarchy, and it's certainly not just women, it's men who ideologically are benefiting from these ideas, that they really are controlling the culture. And it's just incredible when you start seeing just how difficult it is, even for, if you look at conservative women or women who are pro-life, I mean, how are they treated by the general culture? In fact, there's been this discussion about where are all the conservative women. Well, if you can't get on shows, if, a booker is going to get canned from a TV show because she's brought on a conservative thinker, they're not going to do it. I mean, no one's going to risk their career to do that. And so you just don't even have another voice in the broader field. Now, gratefully, there's some avenues that are happening that are opening up, but it's nothing compared to what it ought to be in terms of pro-life voices and women who are actually saying something else. And that's by design. They want to keep it that way because then it makes it just look monolithic. There's no other way to think than what this anti-Mary vision of the woman is. So it's really just a tragic situation that we're in now.
Who is Kate Millett, and why is she such a pivotal player in all this?
Kate Millett is a woman who wrote a book called Sexual Politics, and her story is fascinating. I mean, she was mentally ill and in and out of institutions, but her sister, actually, Mallory Millett, has been coming forward. Mallory had been a follower of Kate's back in the day, back in the 1970s in New York, and over the years, Mallory had this big conversion and is now talking about her sister. And Kate's since passed away, so she's been at liberty to speak more about Kate's life. But she was just huge in terms of the influence that she had on women, especially through academics. Her book was, she was featured on Time magazine, and she ended up leaving her husband and just following a string of lesbian affairs after that. And basically was just an incredibly unhappy and miserable woman. But her book, Sexual Politics, ended up being kind of the cornerstone of all of these women's studies programs that are now around the country, that kind of helped establish them. And so this is one of the reasons why academia has such a foothold in all of this, because of the kind of academic, you can call it scholarship, that was presented by people like Kate Millett that gave it kind of an authority that it certainly wouldn't have had if it were just in Cosmo magazine. But because it had this sort of academic thread, people took feminism much more seriously than they would have otherwise, I think.
Yeah, she was crazy in a lot of ways. I mean, she even went so far as to try and seduce her own sister, right? I mean,
yeah, no, she's horrifying.
She was a mess.
Yeah, she was a hot mess. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, actually, I will say the great thing is Mallory Millett helped her sister Kate come up with the title Sexual Politics about 50 years ago. She was debating, what do I call it? What do I call it? And Mallory said, call it Sexual Politics. So when it was time for me to title this book, the subtitle is Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity. She's the one that came up with the word toxic femininity. So anyway, it was this great sort of bookend, I think, in Mallory's life to see her, be able to come full circle with trying to help some of the destruction that she knows her sister brought to the culture by helping me out with this project.
Ooh, some redemption. That's wonderful.
Yeah, that was great.
Is Kate and so many other people that were involved with her and all this toxic femininity that we're talking about, is this where kind of the whole sisterhood thing comes from? Yeah. I've seen this word pop up in a lot of different avenues. I didn't really understand what its origin was or what it was after. But is that a part of all of this?
No, it's definitely a part of this. I mean, you have all of these women, and Kate's one of them. There's a book by Phyllis Chesler, who's sort of considered one of the grandmothers of feminism, that came out when I was researching this. It was just perfect for me because basically in the book, and there were other books that certainly corroborated this, but she's talks about how all of these women just had incredibly broken relationships mostly with their mothers. And Kate in particular had issues with her father. But it was all of these women sort of considered themselves the lost girls. And it was this sisterhood that they came together that made them feel like they finally fit in somewhere. It gave them a place of sort of feeling accepted. And yet this is, if you look at what they were doing, these women were just furthering the brokenness that was already endemic in their lives by all these promiscuous female relationships and destruction of their own families. And anyway, it's awful to look at the kind of destruction that is there. And, I think there's a lot of parallels as well between that time period and what we're seeing in the LGTB movement at this time, where, you've got all these people that have felt sort of marginalized, and they come together, again, united by one mortal sin. Of course, with the women, it was abortion, and with them, it's sexual issues. And they find kind of this relief, and yet they're never going to find peace. Like we saw in these lives of these women never found peace, never found healing. They just kept getting more and more wounded because they were going down these paths that could never bring actual healing to them. So yeah, it's a sad thing to watch it unfold, and yet we're watching unfold anew with this whole new movement of LGTB.
So I'm a man, and I'm wondering, what's the deal with the men in all this? Like, why in the world has this just been, what, if we just roll over and let all this happen? And it's not that you're going to try and, beat back movements or not want equality and all the rest of that kind of stuff, but it's like they've just kind of rolled over.
Yeah. No, I have deep, deep sympathy for men. And actually, that's been one of the pushback pieces I've gotten from other women is, why aren't you blaming the men in this book? And I think they've been blamed for 50 years for just about everything. I think there can be one book where we look at how we as women have contributed to this. So I'm very gentle to men in this book. But, I think fundamentally it comes back to this idea that men just don't want to fight women. They want to be encouraging. They want to support the women in their lives, and they just don't want to fight them. And some of it is because we don't play fair. I mean, women can be real bullies. We can be manipulative. We can be awful when we're angry. And so I think that there's those kinds of pieces that play into it. And I think good men don't know what to do. I think that there's a sense of, I don't even know, like, do I open doors? Do I not open doors? Like, how do I fight this?
It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah. It's sort of, shadow boxing a spaghetti plate or something. There's just no, there's no sense of, okay, this is actually going to help the situation. And then, of course, bad men are benefiting from it in terrible ways. And so they're not going to fight it. So I really do think it is one of those things where it's on women for us to start making these changes. And it makes sense. Even looking at, an issue of modesty. It was a couple weeks ago, there was a priest that said something about modesty, women dressing modestly at Mass, and he was just eviscerated.
Got hammered.
Yeah. And priests just can't do that. I mean, because of that very scenario, not because they shouldn't do it. It's because of the way that the culture has gotten. And so it's got to be something that all of these issues women need to start taking up much more so on our own and being more vocal about. And it's hard to do. Again, look at the women that are out there that have the courage to be out there. Someone like Ann Coulter. I mean, that woman has got some ridiculously thick skin that most of us are like, I'm not going there. I don't want to be thrown out of restaurants. I don't want to have my family humiliated in public. I don't want to set myself up for that kind of ridicule. And that's, really what's come to pass is you've got this group of very, the mean girls out there who will stop at nothing if you disagree with them. So it feels like a difficult place, but I think that's one of the things that certainly as Catholic women, we need to recognize. And we also have to recognize that there's no better place for women than the Catholic Church. The happiest women are women within the Catholic Church that are living the faith with devotion and love and sacrifice. And that works. And I think that that's the message that we keep forgetting. We sort of feel very defensive of the faith. Yes, we can't use contraception, and we feel like we have to apologize for it all the time. And yet it's those very things that we forget are exactly what are producing the amazing fruit in our families and our lives and our own souls. So I think that there's got to be sort of this turning point where we start realizing we need to go on the offense and let women know how beautiful the faith is and why they're miserable. I mean, it's called the good news for a reason. And we need to start passing that on better.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, we've talked about all the bad news, but let's use this as a pivot point. So you're telling
Right.
people, all right, so really your happiness is going to be found inside the faith. But particularly for women, why? Like, who's the icon of who they should be emulating?
Yeah, no, I mean, of course, it always comes back to Our Lady. And, this was one of the challenging parts of this book, was feeling like, how do I sell her? Because she's been made out to be very one-dimensional, saccharine, nobody can relate to her. She's sort of in a side corner, and we don't understand who this woman is. But I went back to really like the three desires of every woman's heart, which are, we want to be known and loved. We want to do good, and we want to be beautiful. And I think if we look at those things through the lens of Our Lady, so she can take different dimensions because these are the things that she has. She doesn't have to desire them. There's no desire in her for them because she's the fullness of them already. Even the beauty piece was really fun to look into because in the Marian option, when I was researching that, every apparition that ever has been had of Our Lady, the person always said, she was the most beautiful woman in the world, the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. St. Bernadette said she was so beautiful that you would want to die just so that you could see her again.
Wow.
And so I think that was one of those things where it's like women are spending billions of dollars on beauty every year in the world. What are we striving for? What are we trying to gain by all of that? And of course, we have that desire for beauty for a reason, but it's not just merely to be sensual and to manipulate men. It's not just so that we can look good in front of other women, but the desire is there because we have this capacity to reveal the beauty of God. And that's exactly what Mary does, why she has this fullness of beauty, because she's open to the beauty of God and to his grace and to witness that. So women are very pivotal. We have this capacity to use our beauty for the good and to be a bridge to heaven, to help people get to heaven, or we can use our beauty as a bridge to hell, to seduce people and destroy ourselves through it as well, through our own vanity. So it's double-sided. And I think you can say the same thing about goodness in a woman's soul. Even these women who, these radical feminists, they all thought that they were doing good things. They thought it was a good thing to have female-to-female relationships. They thought it was a good thing to be driving other women to have illegal abortions. They thought they were doing good things. And this is a fundamental desire of women. But again, if you don't have it informed by Judeo-Christian values, then you're just always going to go sideways. And so anyway, it was really fun to look at Our Lady through this lens of these things that we desire, instead of sort of trying to make a case for her. the way that I did in the marrying option, but to look at how these things map on us, every one of us as human women, and that they're there, those are there for a reason, and how do we get back to the fullness and the beauty of these things instead of, the disorder that we're so used to being told about.
Well, you did a phenomenal job, Carrie. Again, guys,
Yeah.
the name of the book is The Anti-Feminism Exposed, Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity. It's by Tan Books. I encourage you to get it. It is an eye-opening read and will change the way moms, you deal with your daughters, and grandmothers, the way you deal with your granddaughters. And I'll tell you, as a dad, it really opened my eyes. And now I have a running commentary with my kids about different things that I see to kind of point these things out, because you want to make them aware of what's going on around them and how they're trying to be manipulated into being like the rest of the world, which is exactly what I don't want for them. So
Yeah.
you did a phenomenal job, and I congratulate you on this book.
Well, thank you.
And I look forward to the next one whenever it comes out. And I will have you right back on The Art of Catholic. Where can people find out about you, Carrie?
CarrieGress.com is the best place to go for my latest articles and books and projects.
And that's CarrieGress.com,
Exactly.
right?
Yep, exactly. Thank you for spelling that out.
Well, thank you for a great book and for a great interview. And I look forward to talking with you soon.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Matt.
God bless you.
You too.